Today, we're going to dive into a source that offers a really different take on a core Christian belief, the Trinity. The argument it makes is pretty bold. It suggests the whole doctrine might have started from a simple but huge misunderstanding. Like a single puzzle piece went missing and changed the entire picture. Let's see what that piece is.
Okay, so imagine this. You're in a lawyer's office and they're reading a will, but instead of saying, your grandfather leaves his house to you, it just says, the benefactor said to the benefactor, you get the inheritance. You'd be like, wait, what? It's totally confusing, right? It's ambiguous. And the source we're looking at today kicks things off with that exact idea. So the whole point here is that this kind of mix-up, this name replacement problem, didn't just happen in some make-believe legal scenario. The source we're examining argues it happened at the very heart of religious history. It created a theological puzzle that took centuries to solve, and, as we'll see, involved some pretty surprising outside help. So, what was this big change? Well, that brings us right into Section 1, the name replacement problem. And according to our source, we're not talking about some minor typo. This is about a single, fundamental linguistic shift that it claims set the stage for hundreds of years of debate. This verse right here, Psalm 110:1, is basically Exhibit A. In most Bibles you pick up today, this is how you'll read it, and at first glance it seems fine, but when you really stop and look at it, a question just jumps right out at you. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Who is actually speaking to whom? When you have both figures called by the exact same title, Lord, you get instant confusion. It's that benefactor said to the benefactor problem all over again. But the crucial question our source asks is, was it always written this way? And this slide gets to the absolute core of the argument. The source claims that the original Hebrew text didn't say Lord twice. It says it used the unique personal name of God, which is often translated into English as Jehovah, and then used the title Lord for the second person. So, in this view, by swapping out that specific name for a general title, the text created a puzzle that wasn't there to begin with. So, with this confusion now baked into the text, where did early thinkers go to find an answer? Well, the source argues that instead of going back to the original manuscripts to sort out the names, they started looking outward, to the popular philosophies of the day. And that brings us to Section 2, and a really unexpected link to Greek philosophy. This timeline kind of lays out how this all unfolded, according to the source. Once the apostles were gone, new ideas started bubbling up, especially in places like Alexandria, which was a real melting pot of different philosophies. This all led to two huge meetings. First, the Council of Nicaea, which was called by the Roman Emperor Constantine, who, the source notes, was more of a politician trying to unite his empire than a theologian. And then years later, the Council of Constantinople solidified the idea, adding the Holy Spirit into the formula. Now, the source is quick to point out that this idea didn't just pop up out of nowhere. The concept of gods in groups of three, or triads, was actually super common in the ancient world, way before Christianity. You see it everywhere, from the famous Egyptian family of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, to the Hindu Trimurti. The source suggests this was a familiar pattern that began to seep into Christian thinking. So what was the intellectual bridge? How did these ideas make the jump? Well, the source uses this quote to make the connection explicit. It argues that Greek philosophy, specifically the ideas of Plato, gave theologians a ready-made framework. It suggests that Plato's philosophical trinity of attributes was basically adopted into the theological concept of three divine persons. All right, let's switch gears. If that's the origin story the source rejects, what's the alternative it proposes? Section 3 is all about its interpretation of the relationship between the Father and Son, arguing that they are two totally separate and distinct individuals. The source goes right to Jesus' own words here in the book of John, presenting it as the simplest, clearest definition you can get. It's not seen as a mystery to be figured out, but as a plain-as-day statement of hierarchy. The Father has a greater position than the Son. Simple as that. Building on that, the source points to this title given to Jesus, firstborn of all creation. The interpretation here is very literal. It means he was the very first thing God ever created. And if that's true, it means he had a beginning, a starting point, which makes him fundamentally different from God the Father, who is described as being eternal, without a beginning or end. This vision from the book of Daniel is presented as a kind of visual proof. I mean, look at it. You have two separate individuals here, one like a son of man who is brought before the other, the Ancient of Days. The source basically asks, if they're the same being, why would one need to approach the other to be given power and authority?
The source also uses a great analogy from the book of Proverbs to explain how they worked together during creation. In this view, God, Jehovah, is the architect. He's the one who comes up with the grand design, the blueprints for the universe. And the Son, Jesus, is the master worker. He's the expert builder who takes those blueprints and makes it all happen. Two different roles, two different individuals, working together perfectly. And all of this brings us to our final section, which really takes us back to where we started. The argument here is that all the complicated philosophy, all the big historical councils, all of it could have been avoided if the focus had just stayed on one unique name and one unique God.
So here it is, the argument in a nutshell. That whole puzzle of the Lord said to my Lord, well, from this perspective, it was never a deep mystery that needed Greek philosophy to solve. It was a textual problem. The source concludes that if you just put the divine name, Jehovah, back where it belongs, the relationship becomes clear, and the whole debate becomes unnecessary.
And to really hammer this point home, the source points to scriptures like this one in Isaiah. This statement is so direct. I am Jehovah, that is my name. It highlights a uniqueness, an exclusive glory, that in this view just can't be divided up or shared among three persons in a Trinity. So we end up here with this really powerful thought. The entire argument we've just walked through hangs on the replacement of a single word. One change, it claims, triggered centuries of debate and reshaped theology. It leaves you with a pretty big question. How much of what we believe is shaped not just by big ideas, but by the specific words we choose, or maybe the ones we lose along the way? It's something to think about for sure.